Hey there. Today I want to talk about a photographic question that keeps coming up. Quite surprisingly, even after all these years, it's still the biggest question that I receive. And this question is, what's the best lens for travel photography? I've actually made a video on this subject a few years ago, and it continues to be the most viewed video out of all the videos that I have, so clearly people want to know. Now, I think it's about time for an update, especially considering the fact that since the last video, I have changed my gear quite a bit. These days, I'm shooting stills almost exclusively with full frame sensor cameras again. And of course, this affects my lens choice a lot. And now I'm using the Sony system, but the lenses that I'll be talking about are available for all of the major camera brands. By the way, you can still watch the last video that I made on the best travel photography lens. There's still a lot in there that you can learn. It's not like it just became obsolete. And in fact, I would say that you must watch it if you're a user of the Micro Four Thirds system, because that's what I used to use back then. Now, right away, I need you to ask yourself, what kinds of photos do you want to make? Do you want to make photos of wildlife, birds, or macros maybe? If that's the case, then I need to warn you that my lens choice is definitely not going to work for you. However, if you want to make these kinds of photos, travel, documentary photos, with the main focus on real life scenes, on people, some landscapes, some just everyday stuff like this. If that's the case, then my choices will make a lot of sense to you, and this video will be extremely helpful. I should mention that in the battle for my best travel photography lens, the past couple of years saw a new candidate emerge. The 24-105mm f4 zoom lens. This lens is even more flexible than the all-around workhorse 24-70mm f2.8 zoom lens. It can go just as wide and it gives me more reach. However, as good as this lens is, and it is good, even great, there is a big minus, the f4 aperture. The higher aperture value means that you're quite limited in separating your subject from the background. You can only really do it when you fully zoom in. It also means that this lens isn't really that ideal in the dark. So while I have actually come to love this lens, it just doesn't give me all that I need. For a while, I was also using the 28mm f2 lens. Great lens too. But in my opinion, the 28mm is just a tad too wide to be a truly multi-purpose lens. And the f2 aperture is very good, but when the 35mm f1.8 lens came out for the Sony, that seemed like it would be much better overall for my purposes. And this brings me to the two candidates for my best travel photography lens. The 24-70mm f2.8 zoom lens and the 35mm f1.8 prime lens. You probably can see that my ones are pretty used and beaten up, and that is because these are the two lenses that I use most. The question though, if I could only take one of these lenses with me, which one would it be? Which one would I recommend you to take? I'll tell you of course, but first let's have a look at some of the pros and the cons of both of these lenses, so that if you can only choose one of them, you can make an educated choice. First, the pros. The 24-70mm f2.8 lens's main pro is that this focal range is so multi-purpose. Want to go wide? Not a problem. Want to zoom in on a detail or something that's further away? Easy. With this lens, you can shoot quite a wide range of subjects. Unless you're after something pretty specific, you're pretty covered with this lens. The main pro of the 35mm f1.8. Well, it's actually a combination of factors. First, it is quite small, and despite the fixed focal length, it is really quite flexible. This is the kind of lens that you can always have with you. The focal length is pretty wide, yet it doesn't really distort when you get up close. You can make a fairly large range of photos with it too. Another pro of the 24-70 f2.8 lens. Its aperture is fixed at f2.8, and it stays fixed as you zoom in or out. Love being able to shoot in the dark and maintaining that flexibility of being able to zoom in and out. The fixed f2.8 aperture really helps with that. What about people photography? Do you want that ability to separate the subject from the background, to really blur the background? As you can see, you can do that with a 24-70mm f2.8. And this is because of the ability to zoom in and because the aperture stays fixed at f2.8. Of course, the 35mm has an aperture of f1.8, so that's its pro. In the dark, you can push it even further. This photo is lit only by the moonlight. And you can also separate your subjects from the background or isolate certain elements within the frame. Now, do you know why, as a photographer of people, I just love the 24-70mm lens? And this is a big pro. Using this lens, you can more or less fill the frame with a face, and at the same time, you can go completely wide for shots like these. So, for people photography, you are pretty much completely covered with the 24-70mm zoom range. With the 35mm, as I mentioned, despite the fixed focal length, I still feel that when it comes to people photography, it is very flexible. But of course, that's not really a pro when you compare it to the flexibility of the 24-70mm lens. I want to get back to the pro relating to the size. Very importantly, the size. Most cameras with this setup will be relatively discreet. Want to go unnoticed while wandering around the markets or the streets? Or maybe you want to just kind of casually, candidly make photos without anyone paying much attention to you. This is where the 35mm lens really excels. And with the type of photography that I do, this is absolutely huge. Now, the cons. Hey, just a little side note. If you are on my channel for the first time, if you're enjoying the photos that you're seeing, and if you want to grow as a photographer, I have a great educational resource that might be of interest to you. It's called The Photographer's Mindset, a blueprint to powerful photos. There are case studies, diagrams, stories, videos, and even audio lessons. Oh, and if you haven't yet joined my educational website, The Photographic Process, I don't know what you're waiting for. It's absolutely free and there is a lot that you can learn about photography there. That's all that I'm gonna say here. The links for more information are in the description below. Back to the lenses. The main con of the 24-70 is that it is heavy and it is bulky. Even with the new Sony version of this lens, sure, it's smaller and it's lighter, but compared to the 35mm f1.8, it's still more than twice the size, the weight, and it is considerably thicker. Across the different brands, these kinds of lenses still weigh close to 1 kilo. Carrying something so big and heavy, likely with other things in your bag, can wear you down. Now the question is, can having all this weight for, extended periods of time make you lose at least some of your enthusiasm for photography? And if I'm being honest, then I think at least a few times that has been the case with me. The main con of the 35mm lens. Despite the fact that this is a very good all-around focal length, since this lens's competition is the 24-70, well, there's no denying that this isn't anywhere nearly as flexible. Zooming in or out is done only with your feet. Want to get a close-up portrait? You have to really get into the person's face to fill the frame with it. Sometimes though, you're just not gonna feel comfortable doing that. Want to get a wide frame? Then you have to react quick and take a few steps back. I just managed to get back far enough to get everything that I wanted into this frame. And there will be moments that you'll wish that your composition wasn't quite so tight, as was the case for me here. As I'm about to show you, you can still shoot landscapes and architecture using the 35mm. But you won't be able to do much to change the composition in any of these kinds of photos. You can't necessarily really move around these large subjects, so you are very limited. I do sometimes get the feeling that I am missing out, that I'm not making the most of the situation. And look, there's no way around it. This is a huge minus. For some of you, this might be the reason not to choose the 35mm lens for your travel photography. Actually, I would just love to hear from you on this. Is this the deal breaker for you? Please let me know in the comments. Despite this big con, the thing for me is that there aren't really any more cons to this 35mm f1.8 lens. However, there are a few more cons to the 24-70. The next con of this lens is that ergonomically, it does feel a little awkward when you put it on a smaller camera. You can see that the camera becomes very front heavy. Also, when you zoom in, many of the 24-70mm f2.8 fixed aperture lenses, they're retractable, so the lens becomes even bigger. An important con to mention. Due to its size, any camera with this lens on will be very noticeable. More often than not, you are not going to be candid with this lens. There are of course exceptions, I'm showing you some now, but don't expect to make photos like these with regularity using the 24-70. And this could be absolutely fine for you. But if you are like me, then you want to be as candid as you can. You want to draw as little attention to yourself as possible. I feel that there's also a rather unusual disadvantage to the 24-70mm zoom lens, and that is because the zoom range is quite wide and it can be quite confusing to visualize the photo that you want to take in your mind's eye. I find that sometimes I kind of overestimate the lens's flexibility. Sometimes it ends up being not quite as wide, or I'm not able to zoom in quite as much as I imagined. And that's just because it's harder to wrap your mind around all of the things that you can do at the different focal lengths of this zoom range. Now the final con of this lens. I didn't think of this at first since I own both of these lenses, but if you are only going to get one, then there's obviously the price. The Sony 35mm f1.8 as a guideline price goes for around $750 on BH Photo, and depending on the brand and on the mount, comparable quality lenses cost around $500 to $900. In big contrast to that, even this older 24-70 f2.8mm Sony now goes for $2,000 on BH Photo. The new version is $2,300, and you can expect something around this price range for other brands and mounts too, if we're talking about the original camera manufacturers. So based on all of this information that I've shared, what would you choose if you could only choose one lens? For me, the choice is honestly a very hard one, but I do often have to choose only one lens to put in a bag and to take with me on a shoot. I understand that to get a portrait like this with a 35mm, you'd have to get maybe too close to be comfortable in many cases. You'd have to literally get right next to the hands to get something like this, and you might not be able to move back in time or have the space to move back for a shot like this. On the other hand, put the 24-70 on your camera and you're likely not getting photos like these. I needed to be pretty inconspicuous to capture people being so casual and so unaware of the camera. And very importantly, if I had the big heavy 24-70 f2.8 on my camera, I probably wouldn't have even brought this setup with me. It would have been too heavy. I will say this, with the 24-70 on my camera, I feel like I'm making photos. I'm conscious of this and the process takes effort. There's not much spontaneity. Generally, you're not just gonna casually pull out this setup and start shooting. With a 35mm, I feel like I am casually recording life. I'm sometimes witnessing serendipitous bits of life through the camera, and not much gets in the way. I can pull out this setup almost anywhere, anytime, whether it's during a pretty random encounter or with some friends, and I won't get all the attention in the room or wherever I am. This is such a huge advantage for me and for anybody who wants to make the kinds of photos that I make. To just pull out the camera anytime, virtually anywhere, and to make a photo. And then there's, of course, that weight factor, the size, and what these can do to you as a photographer. Yes, the 24-70 is amazingly flexible and it's so capable all around. You can see that it's given me so many great photos over the years. But despite this, I don't want to carry this lens around with me all day, if I am moving around a lot. A camera setup with this lens on simply isn't the kind of setup that I'm excited to take with me anywhere. And maybe this is the main factor right here. The 35mm on my Sony gets me excited. I'll take it anywhere in the world with me and I'll use it in virtually all kinds of circumstances. At the end of the day, the choice that you make depends on what's more important to you. Is it the flexibility at the cost of weight and the ability to be candid? Or is it the ability to have the camera with you everywhere, to be significantly more candid at the cost of not being able to photograph quite as wide of a range of subjects? For me, it's all about the latter, so if I have to choose, I'll choose the 35mm f1.8 lens. I'll use my creativity to make up for whatever shortcomings this lens has. But I'll know that I'll always have a camera with me. And I'll know that I can always capture those serendipitous moments, those magical moments, the people that I meet, the places that I see. Now, what about the smaller cropped sensor cameras, like the smaller Sonys or the Fujis? Well, here's a bit of my philosophy on it all. Why do you choose a smaller camera? The size of your setup must be at least somewhat of a factor, right? Well, even the smaller 24-70mm f2.8 equivalent lenses are never actually small in relation to the camera that you'll be using. And with the smaller sensors, these kinds of lenses actually lose some of their depth of field capability. This is something that I covered in my last video about the best travel photography lens, so if you don't quite understand what I'm talking about, please watch that. But so this fact that the depth of field is different on cropped sensor systems is definitely something that you should keep in mind when you're choosing a lens. If you ask me, for smaller sensor systems, for smaller cameras, it makes even more sense to use the 35mm f1.8 equivalent lens or something very close to it. Does all of this make sense to you? What lens would you choose? Let me know in the comments. Oh, and what about camera bodies, camera systems like the Micro Four Thirds, the full frame system, the cropped sensor system? Do they matter? What produces better quality? What's better? You definitely need to know about this, and you can do so by watching this video right here. Now, please subscribe to this channel, give this video a like, ring the bell, all that sort of stuff. That's it from me for now. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye for now.